Hello, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral and to the reflection for today, the 12th of August. My name's Robert Titley, I'm the Canon Treasurer at the Cathedral, and it's very good to be back. I've been away for 2 weeks, and so this is my first reflection for a little while. Getting away is a good way of relaxing. It's a very good way also of refreshing your mind and your heart. And I think one of the ways in which we're best able to do this is if we can go into another place and experience beautiful things that we are not familiar or less familiar with. And I'm here talking about anything. It could be the view of a lake out of a car window, or it could be a coffee cup on the table in a bar that strikes you as having a particularly beautiful design. And when you come back from time away, you then see your home with fresh eyes. And those things that are beautiful about the place where you live, those things meet you again with a certain freshness, just because you've not seen each other for a while. And so it was on Monday afternoon as the train came closer and closer to Salisbury. I was able to look out of the left-hand window and see the beautiful downland around Laverstock, which is one of the sites that tells you that you're on the brink of arriving in Salisbury itself. And then, of course, getting right back home, I was able to see again the extraordinary beauty of the cathedral building, and indeed the works of art that are surrounding and are within the building at the moment as part of our 800th anniversary exhibition. It's about the art. We've also had some communications, usually by email, from people who are unhappy with it. One I replied to some weeks ago talked about modern works of art as ugly. A more recent one has talked about them as an intrusion on the beauty of the close and the cathedral. Now, I'm the canon responsible for our visual arts, so it falls to me to reply to communications of any kind about the art, and I enjoy doing so, and in a way particularly enjoy replying to those people who've sent a message that is critical or disapproving, because it makes me work and makes me think it's quite easy to write back when someone tells you you're doing a great job. But what to say? Well, it would be possible to reply simply by saying, well, you may not like our Henry Moore sculpture, but lots of people do, which would be true, but also rather uninteresting. All that would be saying is that people disagree about art, and I think we've known that for a long time. Something else that I think is more useful to say is that modern art is not one thing, except in the uninteresting sense that it's all art that's been created after a certain date. Modern art, whatever else you might think about it, is extraordinarily varied in the way that the art is produced. And if you look at our 20 odd pieces, quite a modest selection of modern art, there is an extraordinary variety of conception and material and form and the treatment that the artist has given to the material. So if you take two pieces, say Henry Moore's giant white fiberglass sculpture of a female form, and compare it with Shirazi Hushari's string quartet, a wispy creation in stainless steel, then you really are lumping together chalk and cheese if you talk about them in just the very same way as modern art. If you think they're both ugly, well, they can't both be ugly, or both be ugly at least in the same way. Do come and see the art exhibition if you've not done so yet, and if you can't get to Salisbury in the flesh, do enjoy the online exhibition. You'll find a pretty straightforward link to it on the cathedral website. This question of I find something beautiful but you seem not to think it beautiful, it is a really interesting one. What are our standards of judgment? What are my reference points if I say that this view or this coffee cup is beautiful? And what are yours if you say that something quite different is beautiful? And if our points of reference in thinking about beauty don't exactly coincide, well, we might talk about that. Each of us might learn something from the other. It might be fruitful, it might even be enjoyable. In the case of our exhibition, Spirit and Endeavour, it's part of our 800th anniversary celebrations, and it's therefore part of the way in which we're giving thanks for the prodigious achievement of our medieval ancestors in creating the extraordinary building which is Salisbury Cathedral, something which was achieved in really one generation or so. Now, the exhibition is giving a sample of creative endeavour of a generation or so of artists from our own period. And by setting up one in the context of the other, it invites a conversation between the two. And if looking at what the medieval builders and craftspeople and artists achieved, and when you look at what we have achieved as in the modern era, if you decide that we come off second best, well, you're quite entitled to that view. And it's a very interesting view to hold. Why have we come off second best? In what way? What do we lack that they had? What have we put into our art that they very wisely left out? That is a really interesting conversation to have, and it's a conversation that arises directly from the presence of Spirit and Endeavour, those 20 odd modern artworks in the medieval context in which they are set. So, beauty and our differences of opinion about beauty. I read a book also while I was on holiday about Charles Darwin, really one of the greatest minds of the last 250 years, who's had an extraordinary influence upon our understanding of the world and about the shaping of the modern mind with his powerful theory of evolution by means of natural selection. The book I was reading, which was trying in a very brief compass to set out Darwin's thinking, had some very interesting things to say about beauty and the evolutionary origins of that, and whether what you or I see as beautiful might by some indescribably long route be linked to the bee being attracted to, as we might put it, the beauty of a particular flower in order to pollinate and so on. Well, I really must think a bit more about that, but one thought strikes me immediately. If the bee sees the flower as beautiful, it's because the bee has a purpose, which is to do with gathering nectar and as a byproduct, therefore, the pollination and cross-pollination of plants. So it's all about reproduction and passing on and creating a new generation. But if we see something as beautiful, well, it may be because we see a purpose in it, but sometimes we react to something as beautiful simply because it's there. And the beauty that we perceive and that we celebrate and that we rejoice in really because it is an end in itself. There's no purpose we can put it to. Well, someone who has been a remarkably helpful popularizer of Darwin's thought is the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. I remember reading one of his books, River Out of Eden, which was a dazzling portrayal of Darwin's mental landscape, and I'm very grateful for having read it. Less sure-footed was his, I think, even more successful seller compared with The River Out of Eden, the bestseller, The God Delusion, in which Richard Dawkins sought to portray belief in God as something that really is now quite obsolete and really harmful now that our minds have been shaped as they are by the extraordinary achievement of Darwin. Well, I was greatly helped in responding to that book by a review from the literary critic Terry Eagleton, in an extraordinarily perceptive and occasionally hilarious review of The God Delusion, Eagleton says at one point that Dawkins has really made a mistake of casting God in his own image as a scientist, as a super scientist. The creation, says Terry Eagleton, is the original act gratuit, a French term meaning a gratuitous act, something that you do as an end in itself, not because you have to do it. God, says Eagleton, is an artist who did it for the sheer love of it, not a scientist at work on a magnificently rational design. Well, God, not as the great architect or the super scientist, but God, the artist. How do you feel about that? St. Paul might agree. At one point, when he writes to one of the churches that he's created in Corinth in Greece, he talks about the people of God in that place by using a Greek word. He calls them God's poema. We get the word poem from that. The best translation of the word poema in that context, however, is that he's saying to his congregation, you are God's work of art. That is, you're made not for some purpose, though there is purpose involved in our life, but we are made in the end and above all for sheer delight, for God's delight in us and for our delight in God. Someone who knew a lot about that was another great mind, St. Augustine. These are famous words of his, but they touch on art and beauty, and I thought I might end with them now. When he was about in his early 30s, Augustine wrote these words: "Late have I loved you, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you. You were within me, but I was outside, and it was there that I searched for you. In my unloveliness, I plunged into the lovely things which you created. You were in me, but I was not with you. Created things kept me from you. Yet if they had not been in you, they would not have been at all. You called, you shouted, and you broke through my deafness. You flashed, you shone, and you dispelled my blindness. You breathed your fragrance on me. I drew in breath, and now I pant for you. I have tasted you, now I hunger and thirst for more. You touched me, and now I burn for your peace." Thank you very much for your time listening. Do now, if you would like to, join me in praying. Some other words of prayer from St. Augustine. O God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Amen. Thank you once again for watching. If you would like to share this or any other of the reflections, do please press the share button below. And if you would like to help us in our work by contributing financially, underneath this video, there's a chance for you to do that as well. Thank you once again, and God be with you.